Hello everyone and welcome to another Atomic Mass Transmissions Live. I'm Will Schick, Director of Product Development for Atomic Mass Games, and today we are going to be painting Mother Talzin from the Witches of Dathomir, Star Wars Shatterpoint Squad Pack. Look at all those words that I just remembered. I'm doing great. So we're going to be painting red, and then some more red, and a little bit more red, and we might mix it up with a tiny bit of brown, but for the most part red. With that said, let's go ahead and just jump right to this fabulous miniature because she's like 7 feet tall, and we got a lot of work to do today. For my palette today, I've just got a bunch of Chimera colors, so we're just going to be using like basically straight artist colors. We've got red, magenta, violet, orange, phthalo blue with the red tone because we're going to be using reds. So I might use this for a little bit of my shade. Red oxide, we have some warm yellow. Our artist white, artist black, and then I've got some gross looking medium right here. I did not sneeze on my palette. That is just artist medium, so that I can thin out everything as we go. So let's just get started. We're going to take some red. Shocking, I know. And we're gonna mix in some magenta. And I'm just going to be looking to create kind of a darker mid-tone here because we're going to build up quite a bit. I want that bright punchy red. Oh, Anne's coming in here. That was the smallest adjustment ever, but I appreciate it. Grab a tiny touch of phthalo blue, which is going to really punch down my colors here. So you can just see what a bully that blue color is when it comes to the shades. Seems great. I like that. Clean out the brush really quick. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of orange, come up here, make my highlight color a little bit more orange. And then we come over here, grab a little bit of this yellow. A little bit more of my yellow. And so I'm not using white here because white will desaturate the overall value of my color. And I want to keep it really rich and vibrant. So I'll only use white and black in the very extremes. And honestly, I don't even know if I'm going to use any black at all. I might actually just go to this violet and come down here. And then see how punchy that violet is. Clean that out. And this will actually be a really great super deep tone for everything. And if I want to go like all the way, I might take just a little bit of white at the very tippy top of our highlight. And that's kind of going to be what we're working with. So if I need to thin it out, I can always go to my medium, which I will here. Pull some of that medium in. And then we're going to go to town. Oh, and one big note here is that I have left off the magic swirly bit, which will come from here and come on up this way. Mostly for the camera. Like normally I would just leave it on and paint around it, but knowing that I was going to paint this dastardly damsel on stream, I wanted to just kind of like make things easier for both the camera and myself because I can't move the miniature quite as much as I normally would. If I was just painting freely at my painting table. So I'll go back and attach that later. But it is there. And will appear there later. So painting light's now in my way. She's so tall. This. Kind of lay down our base coat. So this is going to be a pretty boring but important stage for us. We'll do a couple of coats. I'm okay if it doesn't completely cover to begin with because we're going to just keep working at it. And a few thin layers is better than one thick layer, as we all know. There's some famous saying about that. But we'll just kind of knock it out. And it'll be great. And if I feel like, because the reds are kind of artist reds. If I feel like they're too translucent, I can add either a little bit of white or a little bit of black to those colors, and that will make them more opaque. But we can also use the transparency of the red to our advantage as well. You'll see how that little touch of black just helps with the opacity, making our paint a little more opaque and all that good stuff. But again, since this is going to be just our primary color we're working with today, I'm not particularly concerned with it. This would be a great miniature to practice airbrushing on because she is so consistently one color, and the only other color she is, which is kind of a rich umber brown, is strong enough that it would just overtake all of the red. So you could very easily grab this girl and her coven sisters and practice some of your airbrush control, because really you'd just be spraying a lot of red. Just red, red, and more red. Even these little straps around her waist are red. Everything's red. Today, everything is red. So I'm not going to be too precious about this because, like I said, I can go back and very easily take care of any spots that are supposed to be brown. I'll do my best to avoid the sleeves just to make my life easier, but like her tiny little bit of her undersuit, I guess, which is brown, I'm not going to worry about if I get red in there, because that'll be easy to just kind of like map out with a little bit of wash. Yes, Anne.
Striker 911,
Yes.
friend of the chat,
asks
about whether or not there were any specific challenges in designing Mother Talzin.
Ooh, well, from a game perspective, I don't think there were any major challenges really. She was right there alongside a lot of the initial wave stuff, so pretty much everything you'll see coming out this year was designed and developed all together from the playtest and game dev's perspective. The biggest thing with her was kind of getting the feel of her magics correct, and being one of the first pseudo non-lightsabery users that pops up, even though she's got kind of her equivalent with the crazy green magic sword that she uses from time to time in the show. We just had to make sure that she felt very tricky. We wanted somebody who was a little bit more manipulative. We really wanted to get that manipulation kind of feel for the primary character, so she has good movement effects and she kind of controls the board really well. It was fun. It was a fun little challenge and kind of different. It was especially fun because she was paired against Mace. If you've watched season 6 of the Clone Wars, you've probably seen the little like Mace story arc with Jar Jar, and he goes to Dathomir and meets the sisters, and it's a pretty fun arc. So we used that as a bit of inspiration when working on those packs. We kind of knew that we'd have those two in opposition of each other in their release month. From the miniature standpoint, I think we didn't run into any significant challenges that I recall. Engineering wise, she's definitely got a lot going on, how the fabric goes and the way in which they had to cut the parts up to make sure that she could be produced, and all of that was very unique. And she's a fun mini to put together. I find it pretty enjoyable. And some of the engineering stuff they did was really smart, like how this front cloth here across her torso is a separate bit from her legs that go together, how she plugs into her green magic smoke, which we decided would be kind of the tying faction for all of the Dathomirian stuff in the pack. So we leaned into that a lot. And those effects are always fun when you get to do them. We've gotten quite proficient at them as well. So our fabulous engineering team is always kind of pushing the envelope with those and seeing what they can pull out and do differently and everything. so it's pretty fun. But no, like overall, in terms of ones that keep you up at night and keep you wondering, Mother Talzin and her Night Sisters were pretty tame. Mike does have a Mike. Anne does have a Mike now. Mike does have an Anne now. That's true. What are we doing with our lives here? Waking up too early, going to bed too late. That's the problem. But as far as some of the testing and game dev revisions that we did with the Great Mother here, her ability that allows her to maneuver or move opposing characters was definitely one that went through a couple iterations. It started with just a normal advance. That was too powerful. We tried some other things. Largely settled on the dash. We have push effects and stuff even in the core box with Asajj Ventress, and then you have the pull effects from Maul. And it can feel, I think, when you just kind of initially look at it, it can feel very underwhelming, I guess, in some ways, when you're like, well, it's just a dash, it's just a short move. There are lots of characters that, can push a character or pull a character even further than that. But the big difference is that, clever or canny play, smart tactics, you can backstop or like anchor a character with another character or terrain so that the shove or the push or the pull really becomes less punishing or even non-viable. When it's an advance, you just ignore that stuff. You can walk around it, you can maneuver around it. So it's really, really difficult as an opposing player to stop Talzin from messing with your plans, from moving X, Y, or Z character off a point, or putting them into a position where Mother Talzin can access some of her abilities, her attacks, set them up for somebody else, all that stuff. Maybe pull off a coordinated fire with the Night Sisters. So that makes those types of movement abilities much more potent. I very much enjoy the Night Sister, the little Witches of Dathomir box. I think I've talked about kind of how I enjoy characters or strategies that kind of screw with your opponent, that give them a hard time. So being able to kind of be in control and mess with their plans and put them in disadvantageous positions, to me, is very fun. All right, we're getting to that dark spot, so I'm going to go to my violet and use this. It's kind of our undershade here. Knock this out really quick. Squads with the Dathomirian, the Witches of Dathomir. So, number one, the easiest kind of pair to it, and the one that it was designed with, is using Maul from the core set, or Asajj. You can kind of mix and match whichever one you like. I always preferred Maul with them, just because I feel like he adds that raw damage potential, which pairs very, very well with his brother, Savage Opress. And those two can really bully each other, can bully the board really well and cause a lot of problems for your opponent while benefiting from some of the control elements offered by Talzin and the Night Sisters. When it comes to that stuff, you know, you kind of run out of Dathomirian secondary and support, so you do have to make a little bit of a choice. Personally, I really liked running Kraken and the B2s, which are obviously a bit of a future release, with Maul. You can also run them with Asajj, which lets you double dip. So you give up a little bit of Maul's personal damage output, but you do gain a lot with Asajj's abilities. She also has that fantastic synergy with both sides. So being both Dathomirian and Separatist, you know, you can activate her slip away. You obviously can benefit with her with the coordinated fire. And Talzin's identity in general is pretty free since it just activates on an allied character. That was done slightly on purpose. You know, sometimes we make decisions based on how many potential targets something will have, right? The list of battle droids is pretty broad. The list of potential Night Sisters or Dathomirians is more restrictive. It's not small by any means. There's a lot of potential there, but it's just a less explored area. So you kind of know that you want people to feel good about taking Talzin and mixing them in with the squad. So you give her a bit more of an open targeting option with her ability, and of course it only affects her, so it's a bit easier because she gets to run out and do damage, similar to Ahsoka. But yeah, Asajj or Maul, pick to flavor. Depends on how much you want to maximize your synergies. But then I really like the B2s, just due for like the pure damage potential, and Kraken for the support to make the B2s really sing. Having a super tactile droid is almost always a great choice when you're taking some kind of droid support. But Asajj does benefit a bit more when you're taking Separatists. If you take Maul, you also have the option, you know, you can do Gar Saxon and the Mandos, just more red, lots of red if you take the Super Commandos. But we've talked a little bit in several places before the game, on stream, in different interviews. Like Maul is very much designed to kind of be a solo act. So he's easy to slot into different places because he just doesn't rely on anyone else to make him work. So he's very self-sufficient, or selfish, as the case may be. So, you know, it's not crazy to say, well, I'll take Maul and then I'll take Cody and the 212, for instance, because I think those are great. And they work well with everything. And I think that's one of the fun parts about Corset Maul, is that you do get a lot of opportunity and option. You don't feel like you're giving up anything. Next time I might be nicer if we ever did this again, and I would just get this red base coat done before the stream so we could just watch more and more red. Alright. Oh, so her under neck chiff thing is also red. Sure, why not? You think that would be brown. But according to this, and you'll see that I mussed up her face and got some red on it. I don't really care, I can fix that. I can fix that later. In fact, we're just gonna go all in here. And I'll differentiate those spots whenever. Okay. So, probably have to put out some more red at this point. And misjudged how large she is. She's such a big, great mother. We're just going to really quickly do a second coat of our red. You can see how if we wanted to paint with more of like a wash approach or a high contrast paint approach, we could have done that with some different paints and everything. But I just kind of wanted to do a more standard, traditional paint style where we're going to do some layers and some glazes and some washes and all that stuff. Just have some fun here. Some of that in. Faint touch of white just for that opacity. A little bit of this. More of this. Ooh. That's all right. I'm just going to mix up that. And we're going to start working it in. We'll go as fast as we can. We're just going to mush that paint in. Again, big brush here, very helpful, a lot of area. No need to be precious about it. Any kind of mistakes or anything that we make, we'll work with later. This is our ugly stage. We're going to be here for a while, and that's okie dokie.
It looks like we're joined by a Dallas Kemp.
Dallas Kemp? My goodness. That man has work to do. Tell him to get back to it. A little bit of this. Smooth that out. Okay. So once we get the second coat on and we have a nice little solid red layer to work with, we will go in and start doing some shadows and some highlights. I'm going to not use any kind of pre-bottled washes or anything today. We're just going to play with what we got on the palette, make up our own colors, make up our own reds, because we only have to paint one of these girls. And if she's slightly different from our final Night Sisters, that's not really a huge deal either, because as long as they're close to red, we have lots of natural variations of the color, and it'll just make it more visually interesting and exciting on the table as well.
So Schick, for those who may not have done it before or who are used to using bottled washes, how do you actually start creating a wash with what you have with craft acrylic paints?
So a wash is simply a technique. It's not a product. It gets a lot of companies though make, all-in-one ready-to-go washes because it's a time saver, and it's consistent. So if I know, or I'm going to paint like 50 miniatures and I want them to have a cohesive look, mixing my own color or mixing my own wash is going to lead to that being a more challenging process, right? And so this is where part of a miniature's journey or its destination, its overall goal that we talk about a lot, like what's the miniature for, comes into play. So if you're doing a big batch, like you're painting a whole Legion army, mixing colors, you can do it, it's fun, it's just as enjoyable here, but one of the things you're going to run into is that it's going to be very hard to keep that consistency, because even if you know your ratios almost by heart, you're going to have color variations, and you can play with that and work with it, and it will give a more realistic and visual interest to the whole force. But when we're looking at army games or big armies from a miniatures perspective, we often view the army as a single character, and that's why you want consistent basing and cohesive color schemes and everything, because the eye takes everything in individually. It's not like, we don't necessarily consume a big Legion army in its individual parts. We consume it as a whole. So you think about that army as a singular thing. It's just made up of several components. With a skirmish game like Shatterpoint, you can treat each individual character more like its own unique canvas. And because each thing is kind of meant to be digested or viewed by itself, it's easier for the eye to make sense of things that are slightly disparate. So if your reds are a little different between different things or whatever, all that stuff will kind of work out in the wash to make for an interesting composition, because everything's a character. And it'll make everything a character as well. So you can make, that's a long-winded way of saying, you can make your own washes out of any paint you want. And the primary way you make a wash is simply by thinning it down. You can use water to thin down your paints, and you just kind of go to that extra layer. However, the way that paint is manufactured and the way it works is that the pigment is suspended in a medium, and the more water you add, the more separation you get between the pigments, and so you'll wind up with those bathtub rings, one of which I have going on here because I clearly made a mistake, but it's fine. So those ugly little bathtub rings where the paint like settles in weird ways, you'll lose some of your you obviously lose opacity the more you thin it out. So what you really want to do is, remember how I said I have some medium over here? So you can already see how this little bit of red that's over in this medium is starting to extend out. So for example, let's say I want to make a shade wash for my red. I add the paint to the medium. The medium is simply the same base that the paint is made from. So it's pigment plus this little snot-looking stuff. It just looks like sneeze to me when it's all by itself. It's gross and it's kind of sticky. But there are lots of different artist mediums. Most paint lines sell their own medium, and that's the same medium that the paint is made from. But you can go to any art store and get giant bottles of artist medium. There's glaze medium, there's mixing medium, there's matte medium, there's gloss medium. There's tons of mediums. The reason that you use the medium is because it extends the paint. You can see it here. It extends the paint, but because the medium's the same, can you see how this is a nice, even, smooth coat and it sticks really well? If I did something similar, see if we can do this, with just water, if I just take this big glob of water and I thin it out and I start to pull it, do you see how it doesn't stick? And it's uneven and it's gross, right? You can see how it has like these little splotches. And you can work around that if you're careful. But like overall, you're just not going to get the same evenness, and it's not going to stick as well. And part of this is cheating because we're on a wet palette, but it gets kind of watercolory. So you can moosh the paint around, but you have this kind of unevenness, and it wants to pool in certain spots. And so especially once you get into a three-dimensional miniature, this pooling, this stretching, this uneven, like here we have this big blob where it's not sticking because the cohesion and the adhesion of the water is working in weird ways. It pools here, it kind of like feathers out here. Where again, you go back to the medium, and we can get really thin, and we still have this really nice control, and it sticks, you know? And it sticks very evenly, and it's really easy to control. So the medium really helps. It's a huge boon to the overall, like if you want to make really good washes. So now what we have to do with our wash is we got to make it darker. The way we're going to do it darker is that blue is a fantastic shade to red. We talk about that a lot. Blue is really a fantastic shade to everything because blue is a bully. It's the strongest pigment in general. So it makes for a really great shade to pretty much any color, but especially red, based on, you know, weird color theory and stuff that I don't know a lot about, but you kind of pick up over time. So this is my wash now. Now this really is acting more like a glaze because it's not really running. And a glaze you want to be, think of a glaze like it's a transparent film that you're putting over a surface, right? So I want my glaze to be really smooth and really even. And you can see how I draw the brush and it immediately tints the surface, and it's very even. So you can think of it like if you take a piece of cellophane and act like a filter and you layered it over a color, right? That filter is going to tint everything. Now you can still see through it, but we go from white paper here to a glazed purple. So the colors are interacting with each other like a thin transparent layer. A wash, typically you want to run into the crevices. So you want a little bit of the stretching, but you want to see it like if there's a depression or like a fold, you want the wash to really run in there. And the way that you can do that is by simply adding a bit of water and using this unevenness here. And so all good washes are a mixture of paint, water, and mixing medium or artist medium. And now you're going to be like, well, what's the perfect ratio? And my answer is going to be, it varies from paint to paint, from medium to medium, and from effect to effect. So when you start to do this stuff, and this goes back to why it's such a popular product, why so many places sell their own washes in a bottle, is that there's consistency. But when you're doing your own, you have all the flexibility in the world. Do you want it to stretch more? Do you want it to run into crevices more? Do you want it to be more even? How do you want it to behave? And this is where the technique and understanding the technique comes in, because you can take a bottled wash and you can add more medium to it and you can create a different effect. At the end of the day, though, they only sell so many different colors of washes. Maybe you want a color that you can't find anywhere. Make your own. Play with the properties, just experiment with it and see what happens with it. And that is where you're going to find a lot of success. So if I come to my miniature here, you're going to see that we have what you would expect to see a wash out of the bottle. So we're pooling into these crevices here. Maybe I decide, oh, that's a little bit too much, so I'll just pull it out. I got a lot of working time. My medium's really good. So I'm just going to start layering this on just like a wash. I'm going to get it everywhere. And let's say that I wanted it to be a little more purple. I could add some more purple, or I don't like how purple it is. I could add a little bit more red. I can really control the effects. Maybe I want each element of the red cloth to be different. Like I want the ribbons to be darker for visual interest, or I want them to be more orange. I can control all of that stuff. And this is, again, you can do this with bottled pre-made washes just as easily. There's a lot of great options out there, but you should never feel limited based on the fact that nobody owns washes. Washes have been around for as long as painting has been around, just like glazing. It's a technique. It's just a way of doing things. And if what we try to do a lot on stream with our painting is not so much tell you how to paint something, to be okay, do step 1, 2, and 3 in this order. We're trying to arm you with techniques and to explain to you why certain things work the way they do, and show you ways to approach painting that you can use with any tool that you have. So regardless of which paint you have on your table, and my statement is always use a bunch of different ones, because I've never run into a paint line that had everything that I wanted. Some have gotten close, but more often than not, when you're like, well, I only use these paints, you're really hamstringing yourself, because it's like being a home handyman and saying, well, I only use hammers. What happens when you have to screw something, Bob? I only use hammers. Okay, Bob, please don't try to fix my cabinets because they have screws. Just realize that everything out there is a tool, and there are, and I think this is one of my favorite things about the age that we live in with, the YouTubes and all of the information that you can find from all these dedicated artists and hobbyists and stuff. There are so many tools out there that go beyond what we do as miniature painters and hobbyists, that traditional artists have been using forever, that are perfect for what we're doing, right? There are techniques and theories and ways of doing things that will really transform what you do as a miniature hobbyist if you explore and try it. And I think that's been one of the funnest things for me currently is learning about, this morning, Dallas and I were talking about heavy-bodied artist acrylics, which are, now I'm going to forget how Siri pronounced the word because we had a big debate about it, because I was like, no one ever says it right, and I don't know how to say it. Gauffs. It looks like it should be pronounced gouache, but it's the correct pronunciation is like gouache. There's a W in it. It's very strange.
Gouache?
Yeah, gouache. That's it. See,
got
Anne's
you.
got it. Gouaches, which are just heavy-bodied acrylic paints, and there's a lot of different options out there. There's some new ones that came out from a couple different companies, and a lot of the miniatures painters and artists that I watch regularly on YouTube to learn techniques and just kind of see what they're doing. Several of them were talking about them, reviewing them, and being like, these are what they're great for. These are what they're not so great for. Should you add these to your arsenal? The answer typically is yes, because add anything to your arsenal is always arsenal. See now, look, I can't even falling apart. Is always good, right? It's just what you want to do.
Well, it sounds like that with something like getting the medium, that's a great starting point for somebody who wants to take their first steps past just setting up their basic.
100%.
They're just starting.
And I mean, even beyond that, even if you're like, I've listened to you rant about making your own washes and it is not for me. The fact of the matter is that you should always have medium on hand anyway, because it is a much better way to thin your paint than using just water. So even if you're like, I'm never going to make my own wash, but I don't want to paint straight out of the pot with super thick paint, having that medium makes the experience of painting and thinning your paint so much better. Because again, you can thin the paint so much and you don't lose anything, right? So we've thinned our paint a ton, but even to start, I took like a little dab of medium and put it on my wet palette and mixed it into my paints for flow, because it improves flow and it improves everything, and you don't lose its stick. It doesn't pull away or anything. So super much one of those things that if the paint line that you really like has a medium, you can always go with that. It's very safe. You know that it's the exact same stuff that the paint is mixed with and formulated with anyway. But really, medium's mostly medium, so you can't really go wrong with going to like the art store and grabbing a big old bottle of artist medium. I personally always look for glaze medium because I think it's the most flexible of the mediums, because as the name implies, it is designed to make glazes, and obviously that works well for washes and all that stuff. But I still pull from the pot a lot too. Like sometimes you just do that. Not every paint needs to be thinned. A lot of paints benefit from it, but not every paint needs to be thinned. So, and again, it's a lot like cooking. How do you make scrambled eggs? My goodness, that is controversial for such a simple meal. Do you salt first? Do you salt last? Do you never salt at all? Do you cook over high heat? Do you cook over low heat? Do you pull it off the heat and only cook over like a warm pan? You're just you're almost doomed to do it wrong based on who you're talking to. So if it works for you and you get the results that you like, it's not the wrong way, right? I will never tell you that it's wrong. I might suggest that you try something different or to adjust something and see if that makes it better, right? Implement some of the ideas or the techniques with what you're already doing and see if you can create your own kind of style or add to your style. That's what kind of being a hobbyist and an artist is all about. It's not about blindly following recipes. It's about taking inspiration from those recipes and figuring out what you like about them, what you don't, throwing in your own seasonings, making it your own. And that's honestly what, see, I'm even grabbing some of that medium and mixing it into my new highlight shade here, just because I want to thin this out a bit so it's a little smoother, a little pull. I can mess with it a bit more. That's what it's all about. And then start mixing different media, for sure. I talked about this a little bit. I can't remember, maybe it was last week when I was talking about how I paint my clones and do the white. But there's some phenomenal stuff and teachers out there and like artists who are combining acrylics and oils and all these different tools and techniques to do stuff more efficiently and faster and just make creative and awesome looking results. So, like, absolutely mix your acrylics and your oils. Lay down some good foundations, build up some highlights, and then hit it with an oil wash. Don't even use acrylic washes, use oil washes. Use them as a finish, use them as a midline. Like, the sky's the limit once you start getting into it. And that stuff, man, oils are so versatile, so fun, have been around as long as basically art has been in some ways, Acrylics have only been around for 50 years. Oils have been around for like 5,000. That's not true. But I'm totally going to use hyperbole here to make my point. I think oils have been around for 1,000 years, maybe. Somebody can Google it. They can find the exact amount. But a long time, especially when you're only 50 years, when your acrylics, the little upstarts, are only 50 years old. So, acrylics are great, and they have amazing properties, and I think they'll always be kind of the heart of tabletop miniatures painting now. But that doesn't mean that they're the only tool, or that combining the tools isn't going to lead to an even better result. And you should be unafraid to explore those things.
Apparently, oil paint was used as early as the 7th century, but didn't become widely used until the 15th century.
Nailed it. There you go.
Hashtag thank you, Google.
And we're in the 20th century, 21st century, so I wasn't too far off. See? I said crazy stuff, and it turned out to be true. Take me to Vegas, baby. I'm ready. You can throw some random numbers at a board and maybe come away a winner. So yeah, don't sleep on oils. That's my point. They do lots. And a lot of the stuff that we try to emulate with acrylics is stuff that oils do naturally. So it's a little weird to think, here's this new upstart paint. It has a lot of benefits. But a lot of what we're trying to do with it is to replicate what oil paints already do naturally. Like, they already do it better. Take that, keep that in mind. Acrylics are fantastic. They're still my primary media for painting, and always will be. I don't think that'll ever change for me. But oh boy, have I really enjoyed exploring and learning how to intermix them with oils and how to use oils just in their natural state, and what those paints can bring to me that acrylics can't, and what acrylics can do better and faster that oils can't. And no one's ever become less by increasing their options and opportunities. It's just not how life works. Even if you try oils and you're like, this is crap, I never want to do this again. The experience of working with them and understanding what they do and how you make them work will make your acrylics better. It'll just make you a better artist, a better painter. Heck, maybe it'll make you a better human being. Who knows? It's Tuesday, and we're making bold claims.
I love that for us.
Yeah. Do you? I don't know. You're the one who has to deal with it online later.
I'm feeling feisty. Why not?
I'm going to go away, and I'm not going to go back to the social medias for a while, and I'm going to be like, everything's fine. I'm like that meme where that weird Thomas plane drops the bomb and is just smiling about it later. So take that meme, put my name on the weird smiley plane, and then put Anne where the city's exploding.
Where the bomb is?
Yeah, exactly. Because I dropped the bomb, and you were where the bomb was. I'm sorry.
You know what? It's all right.
Hashtag sorry, not sorry, actually. I can use hashtags. I'm hip. So back to the action here. All I'm doing is I'm just building up thin layers of my red highlight. So our wash is mostly dry. And now we're just blending and building back up. And we're just going to keep taking, so very traditional. If you've watched pretty much anyone paint before, you'll know this technique. It is the tried and true layering method. A couple of the things that I'm doing, which may or may not be strange to you, depending on how much you've really looked into the techniques or how far you've gone, is like, a lot of the times people think of layering as taking a really opaque layer and layering it over the area or the highlight that you want to have the extra paint to. That's totally fine. It creates a very distinctive look where you're kind of just edge highlighting and building up those edge highlights on layers. And that is 100% a fantastic and acceptable way to do it. And you just kind of build your lines smaller and smaller as you go towards the edge. However, you can also do layering by using thinner glazes of paint, which takes longer because what I'm doing here is I'm using the transparencies of the paint. So we kind of mentioned how this Chimera Artist Red is pretty transparent. Even in its natural state, it doesn't have a lot of opacity. So by adding a little bit of my medium to it, I'm able to do a lot of really thin glazes. I'm layering exactly like you would if you were edge highlighting or anything like that. But instead of relying on an opaque paint and then immediately moving to my next color and building my highlights through multiple layers of opaque paint, I'm actually using the glazing process to slowly build up filters or layers of glaze. And the more layers I put down, the stronger the filter becomes. So by being very cognizant of where I'm putting those filters, I can gradually, with a lot of control, build up where my color goes. Again, this takes a lot longer because you're talking about multiple thin layers of paint, but the level of control and the smoothness of the blending is really huge. And so this is something that works really great, again, on a single mini or something where you're going to take a little bit more time on. It's especially really good for painting natural skin tones because our skin is largely translucent. And building up your miniature painting skin tones with a lot of separate layers over a nice warm undertone kind of replicates the look of skin much, much better. Because
oh, sorry.
Anne's coming in with the hotness. No, hit me.
So we're talking a lot about color and how to build it up, but we do have a question from Jimmy DeHand 33 in the chat, who says, a lot of the Night Sister imagery is full of this green flamey magic. So for those thinking about trying to do OSL, with red being such a strong color combating that green, how would you recommend planning and actioning that kind of thing out?
How would I do it? I would come back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific and I would talk to one Dallas Kemp who is a professional and probably has amazing answers to that. How I would do it is I would use the airbrush.
That's a fair answer.
To be fair, right, to not be silly, the solution to building up a green OSL gradient over red is no different than what I just talked about. Like, any color glazed enough over another color will tint it, right? If you think about taking a green light and shining it on red fabric, you just do that with the paints. And the way that you do that with paints is through glazes, through these transparent layer applications. It would take a lot of time, and you'd really have to use reference photos and know where your light source was. Like, there's a lot of practice to knowing where that goes. But that's all you'd have to do. You'd create a glaze of green, which I don't have on my palette, but you'd create a glaze just like we did here with our purple. And layer by layer, like we're talking 20, 25, 30 layers of paint, right? Really thin filter applications. You would build up that OSL wherever you wanted. Here, we got 4 minutes. That's enough time for 20 layers of paint, right? So here's our phthalo green. Might not be the green I'd normally choose for it. I'm gonna add a little yellow to it because we want green magic-y green. So we want something like this, right? That sickly, gross. Yeah, look at that. Look at that vibrant, Slimer green, right? Grab some of this. Now the reason that I would use the airbrush is because you can cheat those layers. The airbrush gives you a ton of control. It gives you a ton of control over laying thin, transparent layers with inks. So I would take the airbrush, I would pull some ink, I would put some green ink in there, I would make my ink the way I wanted, add a little bit of flow improver, and then very gently I would just build up those layers. And the airbrush does that beautifully. You can do everything the airbrush does with a brush. It literally doesn't stop you. But, okay, so the magic comes this way, right? So let's just say we want a little green OSL here. So here's where my color is going to be. I'm just going to put my filter here, and maybe want a little bit here because the magic goes up around the hand because she's kind of summoning it. So we're going to say here. And the way that you're going to use this is you're going to pull your glaze. So you're going to lay down your glaze. Hopefully this is in cam. So I'm going to lay down my glaze, right? And then what you want to do with your glaze is you want to pull it to where you want it to be the strongest. So for instance, if I want this edge of the fabric to be the strongest, what I do is I pull my paint this way. And you see how that glaze builds up right along the edge, and it kind of feathers out on the backside, which leaves that filter. And if I want to kind of smooth that out, I can take another brush and I can feather it a bit. But already, hopefully on the camera, you can see how that green tint is appearing. And we've only done one layer. So again, like, I can just keep building up my layers. And I'm going really fast because I don't have a lot of time. So these aren't the smoothest of layers, but like, that's it. Like, you lay down a layer, you grab your hair dryer, you dry it out.
And for those looking for the color theory behind it, Dallas in chat said glaze yellow over the red, then the green.
Yep.
This cancels the red-green and makes brown and lots of layers. This cancels the red because red and green make brown, is what he's trying to say.
Yep.
So lots of layers on top.
So you've seen here how like I went to a much yellower green. Mm-hmm. So I'm using that yellow right now. And then if I want to, I could come back with a green ink and I could do that. Now, the way that Dallas is kind of talking about it is I could grab this yellow and really thickly, I could do this, right? And then once that was dry, so I could do this. Let's just say I want a little here. I want a little here. Because that's where I think my magic like light source will go. And maybe I want a bit more up here. And then I want a little bit back here. I want a little bit right here. Right, but this is where you have to get into your reference and you really have to think about the story and where the light's going to cast. And the airbrush is also really nice because when you spritz it, right, it's just going to like naturally fall over everything. And then we had a hair. Okay, turn off my mic. Because otherwise people are going to hear hair.
Okay.
And then, my goodness, it must be our day, Anne. The first bottle I looked at was green ink. Look at us go. Never thought it would be like this ever. I never thought I would get so lucky. Take a little bit of this. Take my green ink. And now here's that green that Dallas is talking about. I've mixed it in with some medium and some of that. And then, assuming that this will be nice and thin, I can just go whoop. Right? And I can just start building up my layers this way. And more time than we have here and effort, you just make that nice and smooth. And you'll get your OSL effect. And it's all about building that color back through filter after filter, layer after layer this way. It's a slow process if you want to make it look so good, right? It's just, you just have to work it. And then once we add that little magic swoop, ideally, we'll kind of have that glow and we could build it out later. But we go for our sharpest highlights and then build everything else out. And you can see how, if we just slap this over, you see what Dallas was talking about with that color theory, where the red, where that green ink is going, is turning brown. So we're actually kind of like losing our redness. Because green is a great shade to red. They cancel each other out. So it gets darker here. So you can see how that doesn't work. So that's why we wanted that yellow-green, more yellow than green, right? Because we want it to look bright, not dark. Shoop, and then we can just kind of like get rid of that, make it all messy, and make it go. And Dallas, tomorrow, Dallas is going to have a lot of opportunity to paint some OSL because he's going to be working on Claw for Marvel Crevices Protocol, who has a whole like sonic ability. So if you're really curious about OSL and how to do glow effects and all that stuff, you should tune in. I learned a lot of what I know how to do for glow, like natural looking glow and stuff. From Dallas. Personally, I don't really deal with OSL because that's at a level that I just don't need for my tabletop minis. But it is a very cool effect. It can work really well. It's all about building up those really smooth gradients. Or the third option, so first option for me is airbrush. If I'm going to do glow, I'm going to use an airbrush. If you don't have access to an airbrush, you can do it this way with thin transparent layers and build up using your color theory and all that stuff. Very classic, very traditional. The third way, which is a way I've not tried yet, but I've watched a lot of videos on, and I think probably the fastest way if you don't have an airbrush is to use oil paints. Because the natural blending of oil paints and the way they blend and the way you can do reductive blending on the miniature itself makes them perfect for OSL. It makes them so fast because instead of having to build these thin transparent layers, you literally do all this work with your two colors. So another strength of thinking about using oil paints. And you don't have to paint the whole miniature with oils. You could simply just do the places where you want the OSL in oils after you'd painted it with acrylics. You just have to kind of match your acrylic colors-ish to make some really dramatic effects. So, all right, we're 4 minutes over. We got a lot of red down on this lady. We talked a little bit about OSL. She now looks like a giant blue snot on her. We'll fix that later. Really simple, really simple. Maybe we'll put the magic effect on it, see it. But thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you had fun. I hope that you're inspired, you learned something. Maybe want to try something else out. I will be back next week for more Witches of Dathomir action. We're going to be painting something else from that box. So tune in at 1 p.m. Pacific to check out what that is. We'll have some fun. Maybe I'll bring the oils back and we'll do it that way. We'll see how it goes. And of course, tune in tomorrow, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific. Dallas Kemp's going to be painting Claw for Marvel's Crisis Protocol. Blah, 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 blah. Marvel Crisis Protocol. I had to rewind there for a second. So if you're interested in any of those like more technical effects, glow, OSL, all that stuff, miniature is the perfect canvas for that, and Dallas is the perfect teacher for that. So be sure to tune in tomorrow. Till then, I've been Will, you've been great, and we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.